And we are live. Mark Schaefer, is so good to see you, author of Cumulative Advantage and one of the nicest people on this planet. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks. And I particularly liked the graphic you had at the beginning there, because that was a picture of me that was taken in 2012. It's like, oh, how I long for those days.
We all do, but I'll tell you what, just having you here with me on today's show, everyone, Mark Schaefer, award-winning author, gifted business consultant, author of Cumulative Advantage, How to Build Momentum for Your Ideas, Business, and Life Against All Odds. I'm going to talk to you about against all odds part, because there's a conversation to be had there. But also the author of a couple of other favorite books of mine, Marketing Rebellion, Known, and The Content Code. And I was sharing with Mark before we went live. One of those I read on my way back from Amsterdam and just fell in love with Mark's work. And that's one reason you're here today. I do want to invite everyone at the beginning of the show, both here on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, where we're broadcasting. And you guys, we're broadcasting to Amazon Live. I see everybody down here on the platform. I will be looking to Mark for questions, so I'm not ignoring you. I just don't want to ignore everybody on Amazon Live. And I also want everyone to please share your text questions for Mark to 800-661-7044. I'll be monitoring your questions. We'll be bringing everyone in, and we'll be having a great show today. Also, share on social media. And let's get started. Mark, Cumulative Advantage, why did you write the book?
That's a great question, Mitch, because, and I thought a lot about how this fits in with my other work, how this is really part of a trajectory for me. And I think what I realized is that I've been sort of obsessed with this idea of how do we stand out in an increasingly noisy and competitive world. And the first book I wrote in 2012 was Return on Influence. It's the first book on influence marketing. And it sort of opened up this idea that the world was about to change, where the power in our world was shifting from corporations and media giants and publishers to us. Anybody with a keyboard and a Wi-Fi connection could create content. We could have a dent in the world. We could create our own influence. And somewhere around 2014, the lines actually crossed where more content is being created now by individuals than by media companies. And it's just continuing to go on almost into infinity. So that begs the question, with all this content being created and all this competition, what do we do to stand out? And what I realized, it sort of dawned on me that even if you're great, even if you're doing something great, that may not be enough anymore. Right. If you look at just the competition that's going on in television, you've got to be the Mandalorian. And so to me, the answer is, how do you compete in this world? Part of that has to be momentum. And that led to the ideas in this book.
One of the things that jumped out at me, Mark, was as a lawyer, a lot of us went to the same law school. We had the same grades. We had the same personalities. We have the same people skills and trial advocacy skills. But some friends of mine have gone on to greatness while other friends have struggled, all else being equal. And I think your book really does a good job of showing us maybe some new ways of looking at how we can go through our lives to maximize the chances of achieving the goals, whatever they may be, that we want to achieve. And you started your book off with a contrast between you and Tim Ferriss. I thought that was a fascinating way to really set the tone and show everyone, how this can work for us today in 2021.
Yeah, I did so much research on this book, and I was trying to find someone that had a totally unexpected success and just figure out, how in the world did this happen? And Tim, who's a super brilliant and hardworking guy, if you look at where he was in his life, about the age of 29, when his first book came out, he was kind of a mess. And he's been very transparent about this. He had lots of personal problems, financial problems, psychological problems. He had just had problems with his business. He had just broken up and had ended a long-term relationship. He had this idea for a book. It was rejected by 26 different publishers. And then it became a #1 hit. And it just, the advantage and the momentum just built from there. And so I started working on all this research, and almost to my amazement, what I found in my research matched right up with what he did. And so it was I really could have written a better script. And so I kind of compared Tim and I through this fun little competition through the book to say, why does he know Oprah, but I don't? If we can figure that out, we'll know some secrets of momentum.
And so what you did is you took the reader by the hand and you walked us through the steps to help us figure it out in a way that works for us, giving us actionable steps to take. You broke it down, I think, into pieces that all of us can follow. And I don't know how much detail you want to dive into those steps during today's show. You had the graph, but I do think maybe we can touch upon a couple of them, because I know, for example, well, you know what? Talk to us a little bit, if you don't mind, Mark, about the steps to acquiring a cumulative advantage over our competition.
Sure. So first, let's start at a very high level and say, what is cumulative advantage? This is actually a sociological term that began with research that started in the 1960s. It's been exhaustively researched and applied to politics and sports and education and health, and even Nobel Prize winners and Academy Award winners, to show if you can find some small advantage in your life and sort of play your cards right, that advantage will build and build and build, and you distance yourself from your competitors, just like the example you gave with your friends in the legal profession. So what I was trying to unlock was, how does that actually work? How does that actually start? Do you need to be rich? Do you need to be lucky? Do you need to be well connected to really build momentum in this world? And I think the answer that should be a great hope for everyone is the answer is no. Really, a lot of success comes from just being aware of how this works. So what are the 5 steps? Real quick. Number 1, you need to have that initial advantage. And the cool thing in the book, which I think is an aha moment for a lot of people, is I point to this research by Franz Johansson, someone I really admire. And he showed how almost every business success, almost every company success started with a random event. It was just being aware of things in your environment, maybe a conversation with a person, maybe something that you read. But that's not enough. You need to pursue that idea. You need to pursue your curiosity and see if it fits in a seam. A seam is sort of like a disruption in the force, a fracture in the status quo. Is there something going on in our world where if you punch through that opportunity, you can achieve your goals? Maybe it's awareness, maybe it's money, maybe it's becoming known or something like that. Then once you find the seam and you start gathering the momentum, you really need to create awareness. And I point to some research in this book that I think is really going to surprise people, that things like going viral and this idea of social proof really don't work in ways that we might expect it to. The next step, and certainly many of us have seen this happen in our own careers, is getting help from somebody else. If you're sort of behind on the curve, sort of behind in your momentum, there's nothing more powerful than getting help from someone who can kind of give you a little bit more momentum. And in this section of the book, I redefine what it means to have a mentoring relationship. It's not about a long-term relationship with a teacher. It's about finding someone who can open doors for you and create opportunities. Then the final step, once you have this momentum going, you've got to make good decisions. And this is a section I refer to as constancy of purpose. And one of the ideas I like in this section comes from Jim Collins, the famous author. And he says, you can't be a victim of the doom loop, which means when things start to go wrong, you panic and you start switching and changing and grasping at straws, and you lose sight of what your initial advantage was that brought you there in the first place. So those are the 5 steps in a very high level.
They are. In one of the steps that jumped out at me, Mark, had to do with finding the seam, the seam. And we have a question from Amazon Live, and it looks like someone who has read your book. Can you share a little bit about what you mean by the seam? Your metaphor in the book, I think, talked about football or maybe running back. But what do you mean by the seam when you're in the book?
Well, fun fact, Mitch, this is an idea that I've been sort of stewing on for, I'd say, probably 7 years. I was thinking about writing a book just on that one idea.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think it's so unexpected compared to what people usually think of strategy. And I use this example of Michael Porter, who throughout the 1990s was the guru, was the really king of strategy. He's a very famous professor and consultant from Harvard University. And around 2000, I think it was 2012, he went bankrupt. His consulting practice went bankrupt, and he was supposed to be the king of strategy. What happened? Well, he was using sort of an outdated mode that strategy is static. He didn't really anticipate how fast our world is changing. And I use this analogy of American football team, where you've got 2 teams facing off, strength against strength. And the coaches are actually watching the game high above the field, and they're looking for a seam. They're looking for, a fracture in the status quo. Is someone tired on the other side? Is someone overmatched? Are they lining up in the wrong position? What can we do to take that opportunity and burst through that seam and go as fast as we can, as long as we can, to make progress? And that's the same idea we need to be using about business today. What is going to work right now? Look at what's happening during the pandemic. I predicted in March we were going to see more startups than any time in American history, and that has come true. Why? Fracture in the status quo. Customers' unmet and underserved needs have changed dramatically. Lots of new seams have opened up that people can burst through and make their dreams come true and, make some money.
To do that, though, you have to give yourself permission to have the right mindset. And by the way, everyone, we've got some people asking, where can they get your book? You guys watching this everyone watching on Amazon Live, the book is right next to the video. You can just tap the book and place your order right now. So that's the easiest way to get the book if you haven't already picked it up. Mark, having the right mindset to really appreciate and soak in everything you're saying. Margaret Heffernan, who's a professor at the University of Bath, said in your book, you quoted, said, an entrepreneurial leader today must pursue curiosity like an artist. And I've always felt good trial lawyers do that. I feel like I'm more like an artist in court than I am your typical lawyer. Talk to us a little bit about having that mindset. What are some tips to allow ourselves to give ourselves permission to have that mindset, and why is it so important?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, if you're going to fit in this world, you have to make sure that enough people are caring about what you do. And that's one of the things that I explore in quite a bit of depth in this book, because everything you read, I went down so many rabbit holes doing research for this book, trying to figure out this idea of timing. All the entrepreneurial gurus and all the entrepreneurial experts say timing is everything. If you execute a little too soon or a little too late, it can really ruin your chances. And that is the idea of this seam, that timing is really important, bursting through at the right time. And so a lot of that does come down to chance. You can do research, you can do tests, but sometimes you just don't know. And I gave some examples in the book. Twitter is one of them, where their success was they just kind of got lucky with some timing.
So tell us that story. That's a fascinating story.
Twitter started out as believe it or not, a podcasting platform. And they were building this podcasting platform. And then one day, Apple introduces iTunes, a podcasting platform, which killed their business. So they're saying, what do we do? What do we do? So Jack Dorsey had this idea and said, hey, I've got this little messaging app I've been playing around with. So they started to build this. They just couldn't get it to go. It worked and worked. They just couldn't get people to adopt it. And then an earthquake hit San Francisco and the communication lines were disrupted. So everybody said, use Twitter, use Twitter. All of a sudden, they had thousands of customers in one day trying to find information about the earthquake. And that was the beginning of the explosion of Twitter. But I do walk through some key ideas about the worthiness of your idea to sort of give yourself the best chance at the ultimate timing for the seam.
Can you give us a taste on some of those ideas?
Well, I think a lot of the problems that I see, I consult with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups. And the biggest problem I see is that people are so in love with the idea, they think it's going to sell itself. And they're really taking the customer for granted. They say, oh, everybody's going to see how wonderful this idea is. It's just, they're just going to buy it. And they're not thinking about the customer. They're not thinking about marketing. So you have to consider, is your product worthy of a customer? Is it worthy of a battle? Normally building momentum for an idea or a career or a business, it takes patience, it takes time, it takes sacrifice, it takes grit, it takes a lot of work. Are you willing to do that before you even decide to try to, go through a seam? And then there's this idea of really of being patient. And is it worthy of, is there a fit for your life? Is it worthy of the sacrifice that you're going to have to make? And if you answer yes to those questions, then it's time to go for it.
You may have touched upon this in an earlier comment that you made. I'm looking at some questions coming in. So people are obviously reading your books based upon the questions I'm getting. A couple of things, Mark. First of all, unless I'm mistaken, I think you wrote in your book that in the first year, Twitter had like 100 followers, something like that. And I don't know, and so people need to understand that sometimes things take time. I've yet to meet an overnight success, and I've been in business for 35, 40 years, 34 as a lawyer. The successful people I've met, Mark, are people that have, and I don't think they realized it, but they're doing what you're writing about, what you've written about in your book, and they're executing, they're taking action, they're being proactive. But you talked about the Matthew effect in the book. Can you share a little bit about what that is and why it's so important?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely fascinating. It's something really I could talk about all day, but I won't. Okay. And I went down so many rabbit holes just learning. I learned so much in the process of writing this book. And as you know, if you make it to the end of the book, I've kind of got a surprise ending to the book in terms of how I close things out. But the Matthew effect came from this researcher, this sociologist in 1968. Is a guy named Robert Merton, and Robert grew up. He was a very poor Jewish immigrant. He grew up in the slums of South Philadelphia, and he was so poor he couldn't really go to school all the time because he had to help work to make ends meet for his family. And so he would walk from the slums past all these big mansions to go to the Carnegie Library. And it just dawned on him that these people that have all this wealth, how can someone like me ever get to a place like that? The people who are rich, they just keep getting richer. And the people who are poor, we just keep getting poorer. His father's milk delivery business burned down to make a bad situation worse. Now, against all odds, he got a scholarship to Temple. Against all odds, he got a scholarship and earned his PhD at Harvard University. Against all odds, he became a professor at Columbia University. And he's teaching at Columbia, and his students are saying, it's not fair. We do all the work, and these professors get all the credit. The rich get richer, and the poor get poor. And he's thinking, I've heard this someplace before, and I think there's something to it. So how do I prove it? So long story short, he did this project assessing Nobel Prize winners and found indeed that the smartest, most worthy people don't necessarily win the Nobel Prize. But once you do, that's an advantage that never stops. You get more and more and more resources and bigger offices and more grant money, and you become more and more and more famous, even if you didn't necessarily earn it. Another interesting fact about that, I think it was 84% of all Nobel Prize winners worked for a Nobel Prize winner. So it's almost like they're helping the next generation create this momentum. Intergenerational cumulative advantage.
I think that is, Mark, I know for a fact that's a reality. I when you wrote about that, it reminded me, and I think you may have mentioned Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers.
Yes.
And sometimes it's when we're born, what families we're born into,
Exactly.
the wind at our back. You mentioned the wind at our back as we're taking our entrepreneurial, our business, our life journeys. And, it made me think, Mark, if I had not been in Lake Tahoe after college, and I was an average student. I wasn't that focused. I squeezed a 4-year degree into a 5-year experience at the University of Arizona, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Sure.
But, I end up in Lake Tahoe. I end up working at Caesars for a couple of years, met a lawyer that I skied with every day. He's really the one that twisted my arm and said, Mitch, go to law school now before, right? All right. Here's the thing. How did I get that job in Lake Tahoe? Well, 2 summers earlier, I remember my dad getting on the phone and calling the GM of Sahara Tahoe, who is a personal friend. Hey, you SOB, my kid's looking for a job. Can you put up with him for 3 months? That parlayed into 2 years later, getting a job up, right? And it's like that opportunity, Mark, would not have happened had it not been for my dad's relationships. I get it. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
What about people who don't have that cumulative generational advantage? What are some things they can do to make things happen for themselves as you describe in the book?
Well, I'm really happy you asked that question, because as I was writing this book, I think this book it's sort of a companion book to my book Known, I think, in some ways, the personal branding book. And I come from a blue collar background. I mean, I come from a family of plumbers, work in the sewers of Pittsburgh, right? So I sort of always have that sensibility. And I realized that a lot of so-called self-help books are elitist because they assume you're in a position to make all this stuff work. They assume that you've got money to spend on their programs and their workshops. You've got the time to be able to do all this stuff. You're not taking care of a sick parent, or you're not serving in the military or whatever. And so I wanted to write a book that was accessible to everyone. And I hope that's what people see in this book, that this is a book of tremendous hope, that you don't have to have these advantages. There's nothing in this book that isn't accessible, that isn't doable to anyone. And I think that's one of the ways that this book is impacting people. People have said it's making people look at the world in a new way. People have, over and over, they've said, gosh, what you write about in this book, it makes so much sense, but I just never thought of my life this way. That everyone is riding the crest of a wave that started a long time ago. And some of us are riding big, towering, powerful waves created by wealth and Ivy League educations, and some of us are riding blue collar waves. So we've got to fight a little harder to stay on the crest of that wave. And some of us are being pulled under by the undertow. You know, we're being oppressed every day, and we can't even get up for air. And we have to realize that is sort of built into our lives, built into our careers in certain ways. It's exactly what Malcolm Gladwell first introduced in that Outliers, this book, that before you judge someone as successful, you've got to know what happened here. Where did they come from? Where were they born? What's the rest of the story? Because so much does happen through chance and random events.
So I'm speaking with Mark Schaefer, author of one of my favorite new books, Cumulative Advantage. You guys on Amazon Live, click and buy this book. It's outstanding. Mark, your surfing example hits home. So look, you may not have had the chance to surf those big waves, but unless you paddle out and you're out there getting ready for the next set of waves to come in, you're not going to put yourself in position to take advantage of cumulative advantage and the momentum that you're talking about. It doesn't necessarily matter what type of ride you pull up to the beach on, whether you're in a Rolls or whether you're an old beat up Jeep. They both carry surfboards, and the key is you got to get out in the water and put yourself into the situation. Now, here's something that I think you really felt is important, and you stress this in the book, and I do too. Paddling out for that next set of waves, knowing where the break is, knowing what beach to surf on, comes down to maybe having the right mentor to take you by the hand and say, Mitch, don't surf down at that end. Go up to the north end. That's where the action is. Talk to us about mentors in business and mentors in life. Why are they so important? Why did you stress that in your book? And how can we not know it? If you don't know anyone, how do you reach out to a mentor to try to take cumulative advantage of your life?
Yeah. Well, this is a term and a concept that I think is in dramatic need of being re-engineered and reimagined, because the definition that's sort of popular on the internet is that a mentor is someone as a long-term relationship with someone who is teaching you something. And today, if you need to learn something, you need a Wi-Fi connection. You don't necessarily need a mentor. You need to go find YouTube. Today, I think that a mentoring relationship, it doesn't have to be long-term. It can be occasional. It can be, look, I've got a certain problem. How would you help me with this? I think the role of a mentor should be different today. I think the role of a mentor is introductions, opening doors, making connections that can help people get to a new level of momentum that they might never get to on their own. And as I went through literally hundreds of examples of individuals who have built momentum against all odds, I just saw this powerful pattern, Mitch, that somewhere along the line, they either reached up or someone reached down and sort of propelled them up to where they needed to go. One of the most inspiring examples in the book is Melody Hobson, who tells this gut-wrenching story of how she grew up in terrible, terrible poverty. Again, against all odds, worked, got a scholarship to college. But what really propelled her, she's now the president of a wealth management company. What really propelled her is someone just reaching down, and actually she reached up to this man. She said, I need help to get to this next level. He made the introduction she needed to be a great success in the world. Certainly she would have been a success anyway. She already was a success. But to get to this level of this next level of momentum, sometimes you need help. And we also have the power to not just reach up, but also to reach down and create those sparks of initial advantage to others.
I think it's so important if you have the opportunity to reach over, reach down to help somebody else. I'd love to see more people doing that. I don't know if that's a Rotary cup that you have on your shelf behind you, but that's what Rotary is all about, is service above self. Yeah. And it just really is.
It's actually a super bizarre mug I got from India. It was one of the most bizarre meetings I've ever been in. So it always makes me laugh just looking at that mug.
It almost looks like from a distance, it looks like the rotary wheel, everyone. And, but it's a reminder, service above self, helping other people. With respect to a mentorship type of relationship, though, Mark, a lot of people start that off the wrong way. They approach a potential mentor the wrong way. In your book, you talk about a mentor relationship should never be a transactional relationship. Talk to us a little bit about that and why it's so important.
Well, I think this is such an important part of the book. It might be the most important part of the book in some ways, is how do you view this mentor relationship? How do you approach this mentoring relationship? And look, a lot of people, they see someone that they want to connect with, and they say, oh, can I pick your brain on something, right? Or can you be my mentor? And the way that sort of lands on me is, I already have a full-time job. You're asking me to have another job, have another title that I really can't afford to do. Now, what I am willing to do is talk to people every once in a while, and I do this constantly, by the way, and just help them with ideas or help make connections, help young people build their business. And it's not a long-term thing. It's not a heavy thing. It's sort of a mutually beneficial friendship that evolves organically. Why can't that be what mentoring is today? Why does it have to be some big, heavy, formal thing? I think those days are over.
I do too. And I also think it's never been easier for someone to reach out to you or to reach out to me with a text, with a quick email and say, listen, this is the challenge. What I've noticed, Mark, my daughter's a second-year lawyer now up in Los Angeles, and I'm around she and her friends, and I'm seeing the challenges. And sometimes they're spending hours and hours trying to figure out something where with a quick text, I can get them going in the right direction in 60 seconds.
Perfect example.
That's why I'm bringing it up. I have my moments, Mark. And so
right, but do you consider yourself a mentor? You're just a good human being, right?
Yeah, right.
But you're creating sparks of advantage for those young people. And this is the thing that just works on me in so many profound ways, is that some person I helped, I may not even remember it, 10 years ago, comes forward today and said, Mark, you'll never know what that conversation meant to me. It moved me in an entirely new direction. One young woman came up to me after a speech in Scotland with tears in her eyes and said, you answered some questions I had. I didn't even remember doing it. She said, and I started following you and reading all your material. She said, I am who I am today because of you. It wasn't some heavy thing. I was just paying attention. I was just giving her a little advantage that helped her build a business and a career.
Before we went live, you and I were talking about the new platform Clubhouse, and you've seen me bring across the screen kind messages from fans of yours, people who I know saying, hello, I'm watching the show. I want the book.
Thanks, by the way. Thanks.
Hey, absolutely, you guys. Thanks for joining us.
I never take you for granted. I really do not.
Well, Amazon Live loves you. The community over there loves you, Mark. So here's the thing, though, is what I feel as though we're touching, we're interacting in these from the heart in ways that just takes a couple of seconds, but builds potentially long-term win-win relationships. Actually, even more so, deeper than that, it allows you to create relationships with really interesting people that we might not otherwise connect with. And digital and social, especially in today's world, COVID-19 world, it allows you to do it quickly and easily. And that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Clubhouse, Mark, because the people I'm connecting with are amazing human beings. And there's something about the platform that's clicking right now. And I can't wait. I think next month you and I are going to jump in a room together and talk more about this book and maybe some of the questions that I'm getting. I've got about a dozen text questions here. You mind if I just shoot through them real quick? Yeah. I mean, really good questions. Yeah. And so I'm paraphrasing 2 or 3 questions. What's the best way in today's world with COVID-19, with social distancing? What's the best way to reach out to a potential mentor? Should I email? Should I call? Should I use Zoom? You shouldn't drive. Don't go to their house, you guys. That's not a good idea. What's the best way for someone that hasn't grown up in the business, in the industry, and they want to reach out to someone in today's world? Interesting.
Well, there's in the Cumulative Advantage book, there's some very practical, actionable ideas. And one of the quotes I love is from my friend Ann Hanley, a great writer, outstanding speaker. And she said, when you have, what did she say? She said, if you have a big ask, you need to do it in a big way. If you are trying to, ask for a big favor, like getting someone's advice, you need to do it in a big way. And one of the examples in the book that I love comes from a fellow named Matthew Sweezy. He's a futurist at Salesforce.com who's taken this idea of mentoring really to an art form. And when he finds someone that he aspires to be and wants to connect with, he studies that person for a long time. And then he thinks about what are the questions that person would love to be asked that they haven't been asked, but they're just waiting for someone to ask those questions. And usually he presents this in a very clever way. He'll maybe mail some provocative package to them. He calls it lumpy mail. And so it's really, you need to put some thought into it to show respect, to get the attention of a person who's really busy. And so there's lots of ideas in the book, lots of practical ideas of how, who is the right mentor. It doesn't necessarily need to be somebody even in your own field. It needs to be someone that you aspire to be like that person who can open up new opportunities and new doors for you.
Mark, follow-up question. Let me click here. So I'm back on screen with you, at least at the same size. One of the questions has to do with, it looks like someone probably read the book. When did you first discover your initial cumulative advantage? And there's some more reference here between you and Tim Ferriss. So I guess they enjoyed that part of the book and the story, the contrast. And Tim's goals obviously weren't the same as your goals. I think you pointed that out in the book. Maybe talk about a little bit how we can check ourselves as to what is it that we're really trying to achieve when we tap into the power of cumulative advantage.
Yeah, well, this was sort of an experiment I did in the book. I created this fanciful little race between Tim Ferriss and I. Our books came out around the same time. I probably had a lot more advantages than he had when we started out. And we kind of do this race. Okay, what happened? What was the initial advantage? What was the seam? What was the timing? How did we create this sonic boom of awareness? What were our mentoring relationships? And then at the end of the book, I sort of reveal why I kind of got off track. And it was because I didn't want the type of fame that I didn't want to make those sacrifices. That what really motivates me is trying new things. And my seam was, I wrote the first book on influencer marketing. Look at how huge influencer marketing is today. Was that a seam? Yes, it was a seam. I could have opened up an agency. I could have become the world expert. And nothing, ladies and gentlemen, could be more boring to me. I get ill, even think about doing one thing like that and opening an agency based on one thing. It's just not me. Even if the seam was there, Tim did a good job. He wrote 4-Hour Workweek, then 4-Hour Body, and then 4-Hour Chef, and he made it a franchise, and he started the podcast, and it's going and going and going and going. I went a different way, but it fits my lifestyle. It makes me happy for what's important to me.
It sounds like it's important to figure out what the end goal is. What is it you're trying to achieve? And then take the tools that you share in Cumulative Advantage, your book, and put them to use to reach that end goal. For example, Mark, here in Orange County, California, I don't know if you've ever watched OC Housewives, but there's a lot of interest
on my list.
Yeah. Well, it's something that my wife and daughter enjoy watching just because they enjoy watching train wrecks. But we have a lot of wealth in Orange County, and I've had a lot of very successful, wealthy people sit across my desk from me for legal reasons. And I can tell everybody that almost without exception, you guys, their lives are nothing like what they appear to be. Whether there's multiple divorces, illnesses, the parent-child relationships, overextending themselves by trying to one-up the neighbor with a new car, a new house. It's a very interesting dynamic that I did not grow up in, Mark. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. And so when I read your book, I thought to myself, what Tim did, or maybe he didn't even desire to do all of this, but whatever goals were different than yours, and they're different than mine. And you could be the wealthiest person in the world, but if you're not happy, money doesn't mean anything. And I can say that being 63 years old, and I've lived a full life.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, how would you suggest, maybe in the last couple of minutes of the show, and this is a question that's coming up. I'm a student. I'm not sure I know what I want to do. How can I figure out what I want to do in life? Great question. Yeah. When you answer that question, let me know, because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. Are there any agencies, any companies out there that we can contact to get some guidance as to building out our business from an entrepreneurial perspective? Mark, thank you very much. Love the book. Loved all your books. Yeah, I think people, especially young entrepreneurs, Mark, they're trying to figure out how to move forward in this crazy upside down COVID-19 world.
Well, actually, I'd point to them, first of all, to my book, Known. And because this was a sort of a watershed kind of book in terms of creating like this system of how people become known. People who become known in their field. And by the way, if you're known in your field, your business is going to be known in your field too, right? They all did the same 4 things. And the first step is being really clear about what you want to be known for. And when I do a lot of coaching in this area, and one of the questions I ask that seems to really resonate with people is I say, think about in the last 2 years, something that you did that made you come alive. And what did you do in the last 2 years that made you think, this is why I'm here? And almost always, people are so excited to tell me about, yes, I know exactly what this was. I was helping these people with this. And that is a powerful clue of what you want to be known for. That is a powerful clue of what your initial advantage can be, and maybe even what your seam can be. What is unique about you? So these 2 books kind of go together in a way. But if you're really struggling with where's my place and what makes me different, the first couple sections of the Known book have a lot of exercises. I think there's 8 different exercises to help you think that through.
I'm going to go back and read it again, Mark. And in winding up our show, I just want everyone to know what's kind of interesting is my first 4 or 5 years of practice, I tried to do everything like all the other lawyers in town, and I wasn't able to become known. I wasn't getting the cases I wanted. I wasn't as happy as I wanted to be. It's a pretty happy guy, but not where I wanted to be. As soon as I started doing things differently, Mark, started embracing, I like to ride motocross. And so I grabbed some lawyers and a couple judges, and we started riding on Wednesday mornings. And all of a sudden I started getting known for being that knucklehead crazy lawyer that did other things other than try cases. And it kind of just piggybacked over time.
Good for you.
Well, but I think the message for everyone is, if you're doing things like everyone else in your industry, everyone else in your profession, it can be a challenge to become known. And I think by studying Mark's book, Known, and tapping into what you're passionate about, what your interest is, what you're good at, and don't waste a lot of time on what you're trying to improve on what you're bad at, then take that and add it to Cumulative Advantage, to what Mark teaches in his book. I think you're giving yourself a compass, a guideline, a map, to maybe move forward in 2021. Mark, just wrapping things up, my dear friend Peter Gorell, I don't know if you know Peter, but you should definitely connect and get on his podcast. Peter says, for those of you listening to the podcast version of today's show, Mark reminds me of the kind of guy who goes after something, achieves it, and then moves on to the next cool thing. That style resonates with me. I love that he's not interested in being famous.
Mm-hmm. That's
comment.
right.
That's right.
I am successful in spite of myself. That is the absolute truth. It's absolute truth. It's a miracle that I'm even on this show with you today.
It's not a miracle because I only reach out to cool people, and you're one of the cool people in my world, Mark. Listen, Cumulative Advantage, everyone get the book. It is one of my favorite books that have come out probably in the last 10 years. And it's available right now next to the video on Amazon Live. If you guys want to connect with Mark, reach out to Mark. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
It's real easy. It's hard to remember how to spell Schaefer, but it's easy to remember. Businesses Grow. Businessesgrow.com. That's my website. You can find my podcast, my books, my blog, lots of free cool stuff. And it's all at businessesgrow.com.
Mark Schaefer, thank you for being on here.
Thank you, Mitch. This was so much fun.
Oh, I love chatting with you. And thank you for the bacon, by the way. Maybe we'll save that story for the next show.
Okay.
All right, you guys, take care. Enjoy the journey. Make it a masterpiece.